Hello and welcome to this roundtable discussion on road safety organised by the tyre manufacturer Goodyear. Goodyear has brought together key voices in the field of road safety, parenting and policy for a debate. These are representatives of driving instructors, policy organisations, academics, novice drivers themselves and parents. I'll kick off by introducing myself. My name's Jenny Kleeman. I'm a journalist and documentary maker. I've reported from across the world, and everywhere that I've been, I've seen that road safety is a major problem, particularly when it comes to the safety of young people who lack experience, who have just passed their tests. So this is an issue that I feel very strongly about, the issue that we're talking about today, the issue of young and novice drivers. And we have a very distinguished panel gathered here today. I'm going to introduce everybody. I'll start on my left. We have Olivier Rousseau, who is the Vice President of Consumer Tyres at Goodyear EMEA. Olivier is here today to present the latest research into novice drivers and road safety conducted by Goodyear, with a specific focus on the parents of novice drivers. And one interesting recommendation that I think he'll put forward today is that the insurance industry should reward parents who demonstrate a commitment to road safety. Next to Olivier, we have Chris Verbeek. He's the director of the Belgian Road Safety Institute. The general aim of the Belgian Road Safety Institute is to improve road safety and the quality of life by means of information and by research and advice to the authorities. And next to Chris, we have John Lepine. John is the president of the European Driving School Association. The EFA represents the interests of 25 driving school associations across 24 European countries. John is a keen supporter of the graduated driving licence and also argues that parents need to set better examples in their driving for their children. And now, to my right, I have Esther Salomon. Esther is the president of the European Driving School Association. The EPA gives a powerful voice to more than 150 million parents in Europe, mainly in the field of education policies, working with national parents' associations across the continent. Esther is a strong advocate of making road safety part of the general free education in schools. Next to Esther, we have Danielle Vankhoff. Daniel is the chair for Open Youth Institute for Research, Education and Development. That's a non-profit or non-governmental volunteer organisation created and managed entirely by young people. Danielle will present some of the organisation's latest research findings in Eastern Europe, which found, for example, that a majority of people think their governments are particularly concerned about road safety. And last but certainly not least, we have the social psychologist Chris Tennant. Dr. Tennant is doing research at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He's been involved in designing the questionnaire for the survey conducted by Goodyear, and his view is that driving habits are actually a representation of deeper attitudes and personality traits. Now, part of why we've all gathered here today is because Goodyear have conducted research into road safety and novice drivers by gathering insights into the groups that really matter the most when it comes to this issue: novice drivers, their parents, and driving instructors. Let's hear from a few of those people in this short video.
Being able to talk to young people, parents, and driving instructors from across Europe has really hammered home to me the importance of road safety.
När jag fick mitt körkort så kände jag mig ganska självsäker, men sen när jag väl började köra ensam så blev jag ganska nervös och rädd.
How have you been finding it since you passed your test?
Good, but sometimes what I do is I tend to get distracted by my friends or by my music or something, and I forget about the road and I forget about what I'm doing. So I have to take a moment and concentrate.
Ich mache mir wirklich große Sorgen, die richtige Fahrschule für mein Kind zu finden. Meine Fahrstunden sind über 20 Jahre her, da vergisst man viel. Und vielleicht sollte ich selber auch mal etwas Sicherheitstraining machen.
You're not like those boys who goes fast and they think they are in a Formula One.
No, I'm not. I'm a very safe driver.
Jako instruktor mogę oczywiście nauczyć dobrze jeździć, ale to rodzice powinni dać dobry przykład, jak jeździć dzieciom. I szkoły powinny również kolaborować, nawet żeby uczyć nastolatków, dać dobry przykład i kolaborować z rodzicami, z nami.
I feel quite nervous driving in the winter time. Do you have any advice for me at all? Or...
Well, the best thing is to keep practicing, driving in every possible weather condition.
I've learned that it's not just like about our experiences with driving, but more about our attitudes and our education. So it would be great if as many people as we can across Europe join in with our conversations so we can make our roads a safer place.
So, Olivier, as we saw in that video, Goodyear seems keen to engage with novice drivers, parents and driving instructors. Why specifically those groups? And can you tell us more about the research that Goodyear has conducted and commissioned on road safety for novice drivers?
Yes, Jenny, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. So we are here to launch the Goodyear new research into road safety and novice drivers, and this year we'll focus specifically on parents of novice driver. Being myself the proud father of two teenagers, I'm quite interested, and having one going to be seated behind the wheel fairly soon, I'm even more interested. With the finding of the research, so we are going to launch today the second edition of the white paper, Driving Safety, Improving Road Safety for Novice Drivers. And today we have gathered experts in the room, and I would like to thank all our panelists today. So big thank you for joining, and a special thank for our two partners, the European Parents Association, Esther, thank you, and the European Driving School Association. Thank you, John. But let me start by explaining, so why did we decide to focus on novice driver? And first reason is shocking. So car accident is the first cause of death for young people in Europe. And that in itself is enough to drive focus. And if we look at the facts also, young drivers are more likely to be engaged in car accident than experienced driver, than any other drivers. So this shocking fact led us to campaign in order to improve the situation and improve the risk that young drivers pose for themselves and pose also for others on the road. So at Goodyear, so we are let's say, really interested in road safety. We have 116 years of focus on one very important part of the vehicle, one part that you find on each and every vehicle, the tire, and one part that is specifically important for road safety. But our commitment goes far beyond just the tire. And what we are going to discuss today is the outcome of a 10-year work on road safety, a decade of research. And if we just go back a little bit of the last 3 years, so in 2012, we started with surveying 6,400 novice drivers, trying to explore their attitudes to road safety and their behaviors around that. Last year, in 2013, we focused on driving instructors and their beliefs in teaching road safety to young drivers. And this year, we are moving to our focus to the parents, and we surveyed 6,805 parents of novice drivers in 19 different countries across Europe. So quite a large population, with the goal to understand the parents' attitudes toward road safety, with the goal also to make sure we understand the role they want to play as example for novice drivers, and looking also at the way they support their children learning to drive. So this triangle of novice drivers, driving instructors, and parents are the key to improve the safety of young drivers, and this is what we decided to focus on in the last 3 years, with this year a specific focus on the parents. So Maybe let's dive a little bit deeper on the finding, and I'll focus on the four most important of the research. First one is parents do acknowledge that they have an influence over their children's drive. So they know that, they see that, but they at the same time recognize that they have driving skills gap. So half of the parents today, and this is also maybe a little shocking, would say that they would not pass a driving test today. So if they had to go to test today, they would not pass. So that's maybe interesting information. And more even confess that they have bad habits when being on the road, and that they lack confidence in specific situations, whether it is in bad weather or driving at night or driving in heavy traffic. And what they say also is that they rely only on their daily routine and their daily driving to stay roadworthy. So children pay attention. They pay attention to their parents' driving, and this is leading them or influencing their attitudes toward road safety and driving, especially when they are between 6 and 16, something that we saw in analyzing the results of the survey. Second finding, and I alluded a little bit to that in the first one, parents do not act as positive role models for their children. So an interesting statistic also is that 44% of the parents have been penalized for speeding with their child in the car. Not exactly the behavior we would like to encourage. Second point here is parents do not have a realistic view of the driving behaviors of their own children. They think that they drive safely, and research shows that they do not always do. When looking deeply also in the results of the survey, and especially into gender, we realize that mother and fathers have a tendency to display very different behavior, so they can be very different role models. So we have more fathers that have been penalized for speeding than mother, and we have even more than a quarter admitting to do that with their children in the car. And if we look also at gender of novice driver, what we realize is that we have more male novice drivers involved in accidents than women novice drivers. Also something we need to take care of. So not surprisingly, the view among driving instructors, and this is coming of the analysis and the survey that we made last year, the view of driving instructors is that parents should become better role model for their children. So if we look also at the way parents choose driving schools, what is interesting to see is that everybody recognizes that good quality of driving instruction plays a vital role in creating safe novice drivers. But the main criteria that parents are using to choose a driving school is the proximity to their home. So the nearest the driving school, the higher the probability it's going to be chosen. So not really related to quality, despite saying that quality is important. And parents say for them it's very difficult to make an informed decision about the quality of a driving school. And 80% of them are also saying that they found the exercise quite expensive. And fourth and last of the key findings, parents want to see improvement to existing driving education and become better role models. So parents do care about the content of driving education, and they would like to see improvement. So many are calling for specific lessons in difficult driving conditions, so heavy traffic, adverse weather condition, driving at night. So asking for that makes sense to me. Parents are also saying that they would be ready to take a refresher course to brush their own skills. So good feedback from the parents. 46% would say that. But if you tell them that there could be also an incentive coming from a lower insurance premiums, then that percentage moved from 46% to 2/3, 66%. So quite impressive also to see those figures. coming back to what I just said, so parents say they would like to get more involved in the driving instruction of their children. So they would like to get regular progress report. They also would like to attend some driving lessons as a passenger in the car. And if we turn back to the driving instructor, what they clearly say also is that they agree that during the driving instruction, parents should get more involved. What is interesting also is that you have roughly half of the parents that would be in favor of using black box technology to track the speeding and driving behavior of their children. And last in this section, so everybody recognized that it's a good idea to have road safety being taught in school at an early age. So overall, what the driving instructor are also saying about that is that they recommend the schools to continue doing that and maybe continue doing that after just the elementary school, which is something that is well spread today. And just before I move on to recommendation, the last finding of the survey that was also quite interesting is that we saw that a small half, a little bit more than 40% of the parents said that they would favor a graduated license system, meaning a system where gaining a license takes place in steps, and I'm sure that we'll come back to that during the debate. So after looking at this finding, let's move to our recommendation after analyzing the results of this survey. So we have 5 key recommendations aimed at policymaker, automotive industry, insurance company, and wider stakeholders in the road safety debate. That's the recommendation that we would like to discuss today in this panel with the experts that we have gathered around the room, and we hope we'll have a fruitful discussions around that. So, in brief, Goodyear believes in 5, let's say, main points or 5 main recommendations towards driving safety for young drivers. The first one, we would like both the European Commission as well as local government to fund public campaigns on novice drivers to increase awareness of parents in their roles of educating their children towards road safety. The second one, and back to one of the findings, we would like local governments to encourage refresher courses for experienced driver. Third one, and maybe a more newer idea would be to recommend the introduction of a road safety day for novice drivers across Europe, with the goal to address the specific challenges of novice drivers. Fourth recommendation would be for school and colleges to consider teaching road safety as part of their responsibility or as part of the curriculum beyond the primary school, and continue that education in college or even in high school. And last, and you started with that, Esther, we would like the insurance industry to incentivize parents as well as novice drivers that are committed to driving safely by offering a lower insurance premium. And so what is Goodyear going to do in this environment? So we have seen that we have made a survey and analysis during the last 10 years. What we want to do is continue our commitment towards road safety and novice driver. So what we believe, and this is strong for us, we believe in lifelong learning. So we believe that it's important that we continue bringing around the table the people that play a key role in road safety, and in this case today, driving instructors, parents, as well as schools and educations, to make sure that we can bring the debate to the next level. And what I can commit to also is that we will continue playing our part here and bring relevant research to these people in order to continue the debate. As part of as this journey, because we see that as a journey also for Goodyear, we are in road safety since quite some time and will continue doing that. We want to add to our existing safety material that is specifically designed for young and novice drivers. And we want to be able also to help the people that try to teach them driving safely doing so. So this year, for example, we have started to develop an app, so an educational app about tires to help the driving instructors to support their effort to teach novice drivers on tires. So this is the first of a series of various learning nuggets that we intend to produce, again, to contribute to the debate. So being here today and having gathered here today, I'm specifically interested to hear the reaction of all our panelists on the finding of the study as well as our recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And yes, let's do that. Let's hear the response of the panel to this research. Perhaps we should begin with Danielle, because this is all about novice drivers and you work a lot with young drivers. I was interested to see that the research showed the majority of parents of novice drivers think their children are safe on the road. Is this something that you would agree with as someone who works with children a lot, or do you think the parents are perhaps overestimating how safely their children are driving?
Good morning, everybody. I really like this finding because I think, yes, the parents are right to say that their children are driving safely, but it's because they don't know the real situation that their children are in. Because as every person, you behave differently in different situations. So if, for example, my parent is sitting next to me, I'm going to be driving the way he is expecting me to drive. If my friends are sitting next to me, I'm going to be driving the way they're expecting me to drive. So the parents may be saying the truth, but it doesn't mean that it's an overall truth. And I personally think that it is overestimated. Young people are driving in different ways, in different situations, but they're very eager to take risks. Just because they're young, they want to enjoy their lives, and they want to enjoy it in the best way possible, to have fun all the time, and they don't always think about the dangers associated with this having fun all the time.
So different kinds of driving in different contexts.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting.
Even with the driving instructors, you can see the same. When you are up to take your driving license, you respect all the rules, right? But once you have your license, then you respect the rules of the community you are in. So different situations, different behavior, that's why we have different perceptions of what is happening on the road.
Now, John, maybe we should go to you now as somebody who is representing driving instructors. I found it very interesting that in the report it said that a majority of parents find it difficult to choose a driving instructor and care very much about the quality of instruction that their children are getting. However, they seem to be opting for the ones in closest proximity to their homes. What advice would you give to parents when choosing a driving instructor for their children?
I think the important thing is that they ask around, talk to friends, talk to other people about which driving school they've used. But it does depend very much in which country in Europe you are, because each system's different. So in a lot of countries in Europe, a lot of theory training is involved. So you may well simply choose the nearest driving school because that's the one that's easiest to get to. So it may well be that that's a factor. But it is important that parents look into the training that their children are getting and make sure they get involved. I mean, the results of the surveys that Goodyear did last year amongst driving instructors show that, what driving instructors want to do is to train people better. We want to make new drivers safer drivers. But one of the difficulties with that is exactly how we go about it, because although young people and their parents talk a good talk, what most of them want is to acquire a driving licence as quickly and cheaply as possible. And better training costs more money. It takes more time. If you want to include things like night driving and bad weather driving, all those things cost money. And therefore it's very difficult to deliver all that for a small amount of money. So because the economy in Europe is not good at the moment, people are looking to learn to drive as cost effectively as they can. And therefore it becomes a bit difficult. But there are so many more things that we could be covering. One of the problems in Europe is that there are no real regulations concerning upping the standard of driving tests, because what most people are taught is what they need to pass the driving test in their particular country. So although we know that smartphones are nearly as dangerous as alcohol, there is not very much education about smartphones. There has been some suggestions that every young person should be taken off road and asked to text while they're driving. And to do that kind of thing in a controlled environment would really be useful in demonstrating just how dangerous this is. So there is a lot more that driving instructors would like to do, but a lot of it is constrained by economics. But I would encourage parents to get involved. Both the driver-trainer survey said that driving instructors would welcome parents into the car, and a lot of parents, I think 50% of parents, are happy to get in the car, but we're not doing very much of that. And there is a problem that not all parents are able to provide practice. In some countries, it's less than a third of young people who can actually get any private practice at all, because there isn't all sorts of reasons, they're away at university or whatever it might be. But where they can, then parents should get involved. They should ask to come and sit in the back. And if the driving instructor doesn't welcome them, then maybe that's a good reason to change driving schools. But we do need to cooperate together, and I think if we can do that, we can help drive up the standard.
Esther, driving instructors say parents need to get involved. The survey also showed that, in fact, parents can have a great influence on novice drivers through their own bad habits, through transmitting their own bad habits. What children see that their parents do, they copy themselves. What do you think of those findings?
Well, I thought parents will see this in a realistic way, and they will understand that their driving habits are influencing the children from a very, very, very early age. If you listen to your children, you will realize that even at the age of 3, 4, they will know a lot about road signs, and they will tell you that, Mom, you've just missed a right-hand side or whatever. So they are listening. These new safety seats that we have for the past 20 years are, of course, not helping this learning, but it's very safe for the children. But yes, we are influencing the children. And I'm happy to see that the parents are really aware of their responsibility. Our starting point as Parents Association is that we are trying to inform parents that they don't only have rights, but they have the sole duty and responsibility for the education of their children. And of course it includes road safety education and driving instruction and everything. So if we really have parents in Europe who understand their responsibility in that, it's very nice. What I was really surprised by is that there was a very high percentage of parents telling those making the survey that they taught their children about road safety at a very early age. What we see, and I think it's very dangerous, and also in my own view, I'm very interested in the view of the professionals, it leads to careless driving at a certain point, that in the majority of Europe there is a tendency that parents are not letting their children go. It means that at 7 or 8 they are not allowed to go to school on their own. So they are not learning this kind of feeling of risk. And if it doesn't happen at an early age, and if we start introducing these risks at teenage years, that's the time for rebelling. So if you tell your children, look around twice, they will not do it just by rebellion. So if you just not only teach them road safety at an early age, but also let them grow up.
Give them responsibility.
According to their own age group, it may also help road safety. Another issue for me is that the whole survey is about the parent and the child. And in the majority of Europe, driving instruction happens at the age of 18 plus, where we are talking about grown-ups. And I think that also is a thing that we have to discuss. Because yes, driving instructors can ask the child, the so-called child, whether he would let the parent sit in the car, because it's his choice. He is a grown-up person. So the thing is that we have to find a way for these young people, I wouldn't say children, to understand that they still need their parents.
It's So it's a way of getting them to learn about responsibility and behave like an adult with it. Chris Verbeek, if I could bring you in. We have heard a lot about policy changes that might be useful. And Goodyear, of course, has put forward a series of policy recommendations aimed at the European Commission. For example, they recommend that schools and colleges should consider teaching road safety as part of their responsibility beyond the primary school years. What do you think that policymakers and NGOs should be doing to improve road safety education?
Well, we do absolutely agree with this statement. The problem we have nowadays when we look at the situation in Belgium, but also in other countries of Europe, that at a certain age, young people start driving and they learn a lot of skills on how to learn to drive. They go into the car, they learn all the maneuvering, etc. But there are a lot of attitudes and values that are very, very important to learn also. And then if you look at education, it suddenly stops after primary school. And then until the age of 16, there's no longer, or 17 or 18, depending on the country, there's no longer any education on those values and attitudes they should have on the road. And it's the mixture of those two that are very important. So you can go to the driving school, but even if we look at the situation also in Belgium at the driving schools, they are very much focused on learning someone to drive, but they're not so much focused on these higher order capacities. And they are, I think, also very, very important to combine those. So the suggestion there would be absolutely to recommend schools also to work on these higher order capacities during the age of 12 and 17 years old.
We've heard a lot about attitudes and values, and I'd be keen to hear, Dr. Chris Tennant, what you think in terms of the research, because obviously there was a clear divergence when it came to parents in their perception and their actual behaviour. They think they're good role models, but perhaps they're not being such good role models. What's the psychological explanation for this?
Well, I think there's a very well-known phenomenon which we recognise just in everyday life of a self-serving bias. We tend to think we're more intelligent than each of us thinks that we're more intelligent than the average, we're more maybe good-looking than the average, and in terms of road safety, we think we're better drivers than the average. And that interacts, I think, with ways of perceiving risk. We find risks that we can control ourselves or believe we control ourselves to be smaller risks. If we're in control, then it's not a risk to us, whereas we're more worried about risks that we don't control. So because I'm driving, I think I'm safe from my own driving. My risk on the road is other drivers. I don't see myself as a risk because I'm in control of that risk, as well as thinking that I'm a better driver. So that, I think, encourages people to have this kind of perception that their driving is not going to be a problem at all to anybody else or themselves. And but I think that Esther's point is very important as well about the way that we perceive risks. If we don't experience risks, then we don't learn about risk. And if the first time you're really taking risk is behind a wheel, then obviously that's not very good for yourself or the rest of us.
Okay, now we are going to hear some short presentations from our panellists. I think, again, we're going to begin with Danielle, who's chairman of Open Youth. You're the perfect place to start as the representative of novice drivers here on the panel. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll start where Olivier almost ended. I mean, he already introduced that young people are in danger on the road, right? Young people also cause dangers on the road. And the main point is how to reach those young people in the ages that they can perceive what we are offering to them. This is very difficult, especially in the teenager years. This is what we are doing at the Open Youth Institute. We try to be interactive, we try to be interesting, we try to offer them learning through fun, because fun is what they're looking for. That's why we offer to them different tools that they can use and then they can learn through them. And recently we have completed a project in Southeastern Europe because those are countries with higher risk in European Union. And besides prevention, we also were like softening the empowerment of law on the roads. And together with that, we are doing research in order to find out how to improve our own activities in the future. So, for example, we asked young people, what do they think is the best way to make roads safer, to have less fatalities on the road, in the short term, for example. And the majority was in favor of increasing the fines, the penalties. They also wanted better roads, because in Southeastern Europe, this is a great issue. For the longer term, they have a better understanding of what actually is happening in their countries, so they want their legislation to be improved. We also were asking them, for example, what do they think has greater influence on them? And most of them were saying that what we offer as non-formal education, like interactivity, is the best way to go for changing their attitudes. This was supported by 30%. And then enforcement, of course, was at the second point. Another interesting thing is what do they think is the greatest risk on the road? Because lately we hear a lot about distracted driving, but actually in Southeastern Europe this is not the biggest issue. There still we face the biggest issue, the impaired driving, which is driving after using drugs or after drinking even a beer. And with 58% of the young people saying that. And then comes the distracted driving with far less, 24% of the people agreeing that this is the biggest issue for them. So we have different situations in different parts of Europe, even in different countries. So even if we know how to approach young people in the best way, we still have to adapt to the local community's needs. And of course, we have to involve the young people in the process since the beginning. Because as we do, we work for the young people, through the young people, by the young people, because they're the best promoters of what we have to offer them. If we engage in formal education, then we are going to face the same issues as, for example, in other parts of their education. They won't be interested.
That's interesting. I mean, coming to the point of education, perhaps we should go to you next, John, as the voice of driving instructors. Tell me about your response to this.
As I said earlier, I think it's really about trying to do everything better. You know, there are lots of things that we can do, but most of it either requires people to be prepared to invest a lot more money in their training, which many people are loath to do, or we have to regulate tougher. We have to make regulations that require people to take the right kind of training and the right kind of testing. I mean, things are changing so rapidly. Smartphones is a classic example, but there's also satellite navigation. There's all the gizmos that now go in the car that can be very distracting of themselves, whether it's do you put the ABS on, do you turn it off, do you put the stability control on, how many channels do you have on your radio, how many CDs do you have stacked up in the boot. These huge numbers of distractions are some things that we could regulate, but certainly we could educate about. And I agree entirely, the concept that some of this should be done in schools. I'm a bit concerned about who does it. I think we need to make sure that if we're going to do road safety education in schools, particularly if it's about driving, then we make sure that the driver trainers are doing that education. They go into the schools and do it. And all over Europe, that does go on in different places, but there's no real consistency and there's no real requirement for people to do it in a particular way, or people to be qualified in a particular way. I mean, there are all sorts of European-wide qualifications for teaching profession, but they don't really apply to driver trainers. And then, as I mentioned before, also the driving test. I mean, they differ. The standards differ across Europe. Some are, or in fact, most are based on fault finding. So if you do something wrong, then you fail the test. And what we need to move towards is a more competency-based system. And in fact, CIECA, the European driving examiners body, are looking at how they can improve driver testing in Europe in order to try and make people better, not mark them down for making mistakes, so that we go for an overall competency situation. And then something else that was mentioned in both the surveys, in fact, I think all three surveys, which is the idea of restriction, which we call graduated licensing. What we mean by that tends to differ from country to country and greatly within countries. There is very little graduated licensing in Europe. There's a lot in America, there's a lot in Australia, but simply to place restrictions on young drivers because we want to, particularly if they're time related, i.e. you can't take a passenger until you've held a licence for 3 months, is really useless. It has to be that you can't take a passenger until you've proved that you can drive safely on your own, or whatever the particular restriction might be. And then we also have to take into account for new drivers the effect of black box, or as we are told we should call them, I'm trying to think of the right word. We have a better word than black box. We're told we shouldn't use black box because that's too big brother. Frightens people. We should use telematics. And it's a case of how much telematics can help us. I mean, in some countries there's been incidents where cars fitted with telematics, in order to reduce insurance premiums for new young drivers, have included curfews, so that if you can't drive after 10 o'clock, and there was a tragic case of a couple of young lads being killed because they were racing to get home before the curfew. So we have to try and be smart about the way we deal with all of these things. It's really important that we test the ideas before we simply introduce them. And there is a will, I think, amongst all three sides of this triangle, the instructors, the parents and the children, to take this work forward. But it really should be the EU that's coordinating this and trying to make sure that we have safer roads for young people right across Europe.
Esther, tell me about how parents should be responding to these findings.
Well, actually, I fully agree with a lot of what John has just said. And I want to introduce one more thing into this discussion. As you, I'm pretty sure all know, about 1/5 of young people in Europe are jobless. And we have a compulsory education system that is offering, in theory, free education. But there has been a debate for the past, well, I would say 20 years, what is inside that education. And what we more or less know now is that minimum 65% of young people of today will work in jobs in 20, 25 years that don't even exist now. So I will be brave to say that quite a big majority of what is taught at schools is simply superfluous, and that cannot be used in real life. But we also know that especially for those young people who are failing in school, having a driving license would make a living. So driving instruction in school, in a situation where you actually have some kind of restriction on who can do the driving instruction, to have the best possible driving instructors. As you said in your introduction, I'm strongly advocating for free driving instruction in school, because that is something that they could use in their life. And we can see from the findings that the majority of parents find the prices very high, which means that they are, of course, cutting back. The children are going, or young people are going to driving schools later. Maybe they are jobless for 2 years. If they had a driving license, then they could prove that they can safely drive, because it's not enough to have a driving license to get the bus, because you will also have to show that you can drive safely. And also you had lessons at night, bad weather conditions whatsoever. So if it's part of school education, the last years of school education, it seems to be a kind of answer for many questions that we have just raised in the past half an hour or so. Not having road safety education after 6 or 12 or whatever, trying to solve the youth unemployment problem, giving real useful skills at school. So I think that if somebody will really read these results and jump to the good conclusions, then it could start. In some countries there were some, I would say, pilots on offering free driving license to everybody if they wanted to use that opportunity. And it seems that those children have jobs. Well, of course, it's very good also to know at least one more language than your mother tongue, but otherwise, that's very important.
Going back to what parents can practically do, though, I mean, clearly there is an issue with education. This is something that the panel all seems to be agreed on. But in terms of what parents can do in the home, Daniel mentioned before the importance of context, that they may drive a certain way when their parents are around and a different way when they're around their friends. What can parents do to make sure that novice drivers are driving as well as they possibly can?
I think it's a very difficult question, because you have 18 years to build a relationship with your child or children that leads to an open kind of behavior towards you when they are 18. So I think if you want somebody who is a safe driver, or at least will tell you if there was an incident, or if he was speeding, or if there was a problem, you have to start very early. Not only by giving good examples as a drivers, but also relying on your child as a normal person. If you expect something from the child, you should give the same. If you tell them that you're coming home at 6, and you're not coming home at 6 and you're not calling, they would just laugh at you when they are 14 or 16 or whatever. So what parents on the first place should do is to build up a real warm parent-child relationship. And that can help everything, in my view.
It's all part of the package of being a good parent.
Yes, it is.
Chris, you're a political advisor of the Belgian government. Policy is obviously key to this. What do you have to say?
Well, I would like to refer to the recommendation you have made regarding the public awareness campaigns. So we absolutely underline this recommendation. We think that national government should use public awareness campaigns targeting the novice driver. However, we as the Belgium Institute, we do not believe in this term, the novice driver. If you look at Europe, we talk about hundreds of thousands of youngsters that go on the road every year. And when the government often feels a bit comfortable by saying, okay, we have done a campaign for the novice driver, we have launched one big campaign, one big message to all of them. But that is something that doesn't work. It would never change behavior or the attitude of youngsters. It would be exactly the same as selling a product worldwide and not taking into account that you have different prices, different culture, different languages. So you have to segment this market of the novice drivers. And I think the video we have seen from Goodyear was a good example. You had a girl that looked a bit scary to go on the road. You had another guy who was more macho and who didn't have any problem to go on the road. So what we have done is we have really segmented the market of the novice driver, and we came up with 6 different archetypes. And those archetypes, they stand for 6 different types of young people. I can quickly run through it. We have Jana, that's the girl's name, is what we would call the very inexperienced and stressed driver, a bit the same as the girl we saw in the video. We have Kenneth, he's the guy who's already working on his car at 16 and very, very eager to drive. He's very confident. Charlotte, who is the responsible driver. Bruno, he's the experienced driver, but who likes to drink a beer once in a while. He's the one who goes to the football and stays a little bit longer with his friends and then drives home. Anouk, the organized party people, where with Anouk the problem is maybe not so much drugs and alcohol, but it would be fatigue, because at 2 o'clock at night she would take the car and drive to another party, and it can be 50 kilometers away. And Michiel, he would then be more the glamour boy, would be more drugs and alcohol, etc. So we use these archetypes when we launch our campaigns. Why? Because if you would try to communicate about road safety, for example, to Jana, who is the very inexperienced and stressed driver, and you would come with a shocking campaign, it wouldn't work. She would become much more stressed and she would be much more afraid to go on the road. So we have launched, for example, a campaign, and that campaign is all about experience. We tell those youngsters, and that would be the primary target group, we tell those youngsters, listen, the first 1,500 kilometers are the most dangerous, but we will give you tips and tricks. We've worked together with 2 radio stations that were really focusing on those kind of youngsters, and it turned out to be a very good campaign with very good results. The shocking campaigns, which we see, for example, a lot in the UK, that would be really much more effective on, for example, this archetype of Kenneth, who is really crazy about his car, likes to drive hard, but who is not always aware of the consequences. And also when you look at Kenneth, for example, the peer-to-peer would be a very important factor. Who is sitting next to him? If it's all boys and they talk about their cars, etc., the one who would be sitting next to him would have a very big influence on the way this guy would be driving. when we do campaigns for Anouk, which is much more about fatigue, we try to be present at discotheques and late at night, and to talk face to face and show material to explain her that she has to be careful, because fatigue could also be one of the big issues for accidents, especially during weekends. So maybe to summarize two things. First of all, I think it's very important for the government to understand that campaigning is not something that has to stand alone. It has to be integrated with enforcement, education, campaigning. That's one. And secondly, just doing one big campaign with one big message once a year to all the new drivers, the novice drivers, doesn't make sense. I think a lot more effort has to be done to work on this behavior of youngsters.
Dr. Tennant, you have worked on some of the analysis from the survey, and you can give us an academic perspective on what some of the next steps could be.
Yes, well, I mean, obviously there is a very extensive academic literature on road safety, and particularly on novice drivers, because there's so much such high fatality figures there, and so a lot of research is there, a lot of the research into the sort of psychological factors behind novice driving, and also a lot of research into the influence that parents have on their children's driving. That might simply be showing that there is an association between the level of accidents experienced by parents and similar events for their children. Or more recently, I think there's been quite a bit of research into the kind of what's referred to as the family climate, the climate at home as to whether or not road safety is taken seriously. And whether or not there's a commitment or a non-commitment to road safety. And all of these surveys all of these pieces of research do support just how strong the influence of parents over their children's driving behaviour is. And this survey that Goodyear have conducted is, again, a contributor to that, in terms of showing that people who admit to speeding with their children are more likely to be tolerant of their children speeding themselves. And we also could see that we have this sort of, as I said before, the self-serving bias of people kind of rating their own children's behaviour, their own behaviour as better, as safer than other people's. But going forward, as you mentioned, I think in your introduction, I think it's important to recognise that attitudes to road safety, attitudes to traffic regulation necessarily kind of stem from broader orientations, from individuals who are kind of generally in favour of regulation or are concerned about risk, are more likely to be more careful drivers or more compliant with regulation. So, and in this survey, we show that people who favour regulation generally, who are more happy with government intervention, well, they are more likely to support refresher courses, they are more likely to support graduated tests, and they are less tolerant of their children speeding. One could say, well, is that useful? Because we can't exactly start changing people's attitude to government generally. But I think it's worth recognising that there is this kind of this link, because in fact, people are much more receptive to traffic regulation than they are to government regulation generally. Although the two are interconnected, people actually recognise that they need traffic regulation. And why is that? Because they know that other drivers are a risk to them. They need to see that other drivers need to be regulated, rather than necessarily thinking of themselves as needing to be regulated. But I think that's possibly where there is an opportunity for in terms of the process of education, is if one can convey to novice drivers the idea that the other drivers on the road see them as other drivers, see them as a risk. It's just a way of encouraging people to take the perspective. Then you might actually start getting a kind of a greater readiness or willingness to comply with traffic regulation. If you can get people to see other road users as fellow travellers rather than the opposition, the people in the way, the obstacle to my own progress down the road.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to take some questions from our online audience who are across the globe watching us. I have a question here for Olivier from Goodyear. Which of Goodyear's many recommendations do you think would make the biggest difference?
Yeah, interesting question. To be honest, I like the 5. So very difficult for me to pick one out of the 5. And listening also to the experts today, I would say I was taking notes. I think I'm going to add 6 or 7 to the list of 5 because there were a lot of interesting ideas. What I would say, if we take the 5 back at the end, what are we interested in? We are interested in information, education, and let's say the concept of learning through your own life. So I wouldn't want to answer the question on saying, there is one that I really favor, but I would say as long as we manage to get all the parties involved in order to make sure that we continue education of all the drivers during their whole life, I think we'll make a success out of driving to a better road safety.
We've got another question here, which I think is clearly for Esther. Obviously, it's a difficult thing to codify, but what one thing could or should parents do to help turn their children into safe novice drivers?
Trust them.
Simple as that?
And to make them trust the parents.
So from your perspective, it's very much about having a good relationship in general with
Yes.
your child.
Yes.
So then I'd be interested to know, what do you think of this black box technology? Is it something that you would support? Because, to be monitoring your child effectively, you're not trusting them.
Well, I have great problems with these monitoring things. There are all kinds of offers arriving to EPA about different applications that would help you to spy on your kids' smartphones and things like that. They have the right to privacy. But again, if there is trust, and if there is a black box technology, and the young person understands why it's for him or her to have that black box in the car, then we can have an agreement. And I think if it's based on a mutual agreement, then it can work perfectly. Because then we can analyze what happened, and we can discuss it, and he or she will see where there was a mistake or what should be done in a different way later on.
If I could just bring you in, Chris, because you were talking about these different archetypes. Do you think that perhaps a different kind of driver would respond better to black box technology, perhaps one that's more afraid than other kinds that we have to look at a case-by-case basis?
No, absolutely. I'll come back to that right away. I would just like to add to what Esther was saying. Trust is one very important thing. But also being a good example for your child is also very, very important. And what we see in Belgium, we are not doing such a good job. We are still much too permissive towards alcohol, drunk driving, and speeding, and therefore this social norms should also be changed. That's something very, very important. So trust is one important thing, but also being a good example for your child who starts driving. I'm a bit older and grayer than Olivier, but my son just got his driver's license, and I must say there are days that I'm also a little bit stressed when he's alone on the road. The black box are the other ways of finding out what's going on the road. I think it's very important for those children who feel unconfident and who want to be a bit more confident and making sure that there's like somebody who's looking there over his or her shoulder, but at the same time you have to let them go at a certain moment. And secondly, those ones who are very confident and very sure of themselves, we have already seen that we'll try a lot of ways to just try to get rid of this device and not having the possibility of being followed, so to speak. So it will change from archetype to archetype, absolutely.
We have another question that's come in, which is about Daniel's point that young people are eager to take risks. What evidence is there that education can overcome this desire to take risks among young people?
Shall I take it?
Yes, I mean anybody can, but yes, if you can answer it.
Well, as Dr. Tennant will support, it's in the young person to take risks. And how to overcome this desire, it's to let them take the risks in controlled environment. As John was proposing, they can let the young people in rural areas drive and write SMS, so they can see by themselves in safe environment that this is not possible. This is what also we are doing. We are letting them, for example, sit on a simulator or like put the alcohol goggles on their eyes to see how the life looks when they're drunk. So they experience this, they fall, they kick, and they see that actually what they think is happening when they're behind the wheel may be very different from the way the others perceive them, as Dr. Tennant said. It's two ways of looking at the same situation, which also can be used, for example, in installing the telematics in the cars. You just have to offer them the right tools to explain them the right way, what it will bring to their safety and to safety of the others, so that they can accept it. This is the proper way to overcome the risk, to involve the young people in the decision for themselves that they don't want these risks to be posed on themselves.
Do you want to come in on that?
I think the point about the context in which you take risks is essential there, isn't it? In the sense that you can't stop young people, particularly young men, from wanting to take risks. There's a huge amount of commercialization of them taking risks, whether it's bungee jumping or whatever. So, I mean, the fact that they want to take risks isn't going to change. It's persuading people that behind the wheel of a car is not the right place to be taking risks.
Yeah, and maybe one more point on that, and Esther was mentioning the comment that we are teaching grown-ups. So I think that's also the point, meaning you need to adapt your education to the fact that you are not teaching at the moment of passing a driving exam young children. You are teaching grown-ups, and adapt your education, the tools that you are using, the way you communicate to an audience that will be on the road on his own very soon.
I believe that we have a question on the line that somebody has rung in to speak to us. Hopefully we can get to this question now. Hello, are you there? Okay, we don't have anybody. We don't have anybody on the phone at the moment, but we do have another question that has come through on the internet. This is a question for Chris. Do you believe that more pressure should be put on governments to effectively deal with the young novice driver issue, including longer on the road experience levels, as well as making society, especially parents, more aware that this is the biggest killer and maimer of young people?
A short answer would be saying yes. The longer answer would be that it would not be the responsibility only from the government. Before I already mentioned the social norm and the social acceptance, and I think that it's very important for us as a society also to no longer accept that people go on the road when they have been drinking, that they are speeding, etc. That's one thing. And sometimes social inacceptance has gives more results than stronger enforcement by the police. We see that also with drinking and driving. You can do a lot more controlling by the police, but when the social norm would change, it would have more effect. When your peer-to-peer would change, it would have more effect. That is one thing. Secondly, we are absolutely pro this continuous learning, lifelong learning, because at this moment, and I was in the same situation with my son. He had some education in primary school, then he didn't have any education until he's 16. At 16 he started dreaming about driving a car, and then he got into the education and learned how to drive. But there were some very important remarks you could make. You can talk about the driving schools, etc., but we also have to look at the level of the driver instructors. And the driver instructors, if we see in Belgium, They don't need a specific degree to learn children how to drive. If you would compare this with Scandinavia, they have like a university degree of 2 years before they can start teaching youngsters to drive. There is also a possibility in a lot of countries also because of economics, and that's very important, that parents can teach their children themselves how to drive. I think that's not wrong, but then at least parents should have a sort of training before they start teaching their children to drive. Also, what I mentioned before, the skills are not only how to learn to drive, but it's also the values and the attitude. You have to learn children already at young age what risk means. But we are becoming in our society, I think, so protective for our youngers. And if we don't let them go to school with a bike at 6 years old, it will be very hard to get inside. I remember my daughter told me once, I told her also, I said, you cannot go to school, there are too many cars, and she was like 8 years old, and she told me, yes, but if every papa would say that to his child, nobody would come with a bike and there would only be cars on the road. So I think that there are measures that can be taken by government really to improve the situation before younger novice drivers go on the road. Absolutely.
May I add something?
Yes, of course.
You were talking about a campaign showing how dangerous driving is. And I think if it comes to parents, there are archetypes too. So it can be very dangerous because certain parents would discourage their children from learning to drive if you emphasize too much how dangerous that is. So again, as you said with the young people themselves, parents are very different.
So a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work.
It doesn't work.
Yes?
If I may add something, I think that there should be a clear distinction between learning how to drive and learning about road safety. And we don't need to put everything on the driving instructors because they're good in what they're doing. Probably if we decide to press more governments for better education during the school, then maybe there should be different people doing the road safety education. Because from the driver instructor, what we expect is, as John said, to get a very cheap driving course and to pass the test, so we have a driving license. But then there is a completely different thing to survive on the road.
That leads very nicely into my next question, which I think is clearly should be directed to John. We have somebody who has asked, which European country has the best driver training system, do you think?
Oh, mine. It depends how you define it. I mean, there are some very restrictive driver training systems in Europe where people are required to take a certain number of theory lessons and can only have driving lessons with a driving school and are not allowed to do any practice until after they've passed their test. And that compares with countries where the system is quite relaxed and parents can teach their own offspring to drive. What we don't really know is why some are more successful than others. The accident rates across Europe vary enormously, and we don't really know why. I mean, some people consider it to do with inherent national characteristics, that in some countries people are much more polite than in other countries. Some people would consider it's to do with the regulations, that if you live in Central Europe, then you can blame every country around you because people are travelling through your country that haven't been trained in your country. So there isn't really a definitive answer, but clearly the local social norms need to be followed in order to make sure that people are driving properly. And it's also important to remember that whilst we talk about education in schools, that's vital and we should be doing more of it. My concern is that it isn't done by school teachers with no extra training. It should be done by driver training professionals, I think, in order to make sure that the people who are doing it properly. And I think also that I think everybody's talked about this business of everybody being a bit different. And obviously there's a gender split as well. We know that young men are more likely to be involved in road traffic accidents or road traffic collisions than females. We know that young men kill more females than anybody else in cars. So we need to make sure that we mould the system to them. But I don't think there is one correct way. I think there are lots of ways, different ways, that can work in different countries because different countries require different things. And some of the systems in Northern Europe, in the Nordic countries, are absolutely excellent. Some of the systems that are now being introduced in some of the Eastern European countries in the EU are very different, but they work in those countries. They are working very hard to bring down accident rates in those countries. So I think part of the problem with answering the question in a straightforward way is it depends where you start from. People are starting from different places and therefore different systems work in different countries.
I'd like to bring Chris Tennant in on some of this because what's come out of the discussion so far for me is the importance of, national characteristics, but also social norms. If you look at drunk driving and attitudes to drunk driving, how that managed to create a massive change that no amount of policy could have ever hoped for. How can social norms be effective when dealing with young drivers?
Well, of course, it takes a long time to significantly change social norms, as was seen with seatbelt campaigns or drunk driving campaigns. It included shock campaigning, shock advertising that gradually had an effect. Unfortunately, probably the truth is that only when you actually have direct contact with some event, you know somebody who has been involved in a road traffic accident, and of course, then that might start having has more immediate relevance. It is more likely to influence your own behaviour, and so over time with the campaigns, which of course can then will essentially back up your own experience. If you have experienced somebody or knowing somebody who's been affected by an RTA, then you're going to start taking it more seriously and caring about it more. But that's the sad fact of it, of course, that only with more fatalities are people going to take it more seriously, and eventually that, combined with the campaigning, will start changing attitudes over time.
I have another question here, which I think we should all come in on. What role do you think the media should play in bringing attention to this important subject? Anyone got any tips for journalists like me? What should we be taking from all of this?
What we have seen over the last 2 years is that as soon as we have launched the campaign, that the media was immediately discussing about the way we were bringing the campaign. They would say, oh, this campaign would be too shocking, this campaign would be this campaign would be that. And I think they should just draw much more attention to the problem than to the way that organizations are campaigning, because we do a lot of research, we do a lot of post-testing, pre-testing, post-testing. We interview a lot of people before we start doing campaigns, so we know at what moment we have to do a shocking campaign or a more humoristic campaign or whatever. But every time again, and we have talked about this also with a lot of colleagues in other countries, the press likes to discuss about the campaign and not so much about the problem. So I think they could draw much more attention to the problem, and that's more than just saying every Monday in the newspaper, oh, we had so many deaths or we had so many accidents. Let's say that's the easy part. That's just saying, okay, this is what happened. But why did it happen? How does it come? What was the situation? And giving more explanation, that's something that the media should really
focus on the message and not the messenger.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyone else? Any tips for media?
I totally agree with Chris that media should not focus only on the negative part. From my own experience, media speaks about road safety mainly when there is a huge issue like people dying on the road. Even if there is a good campaign, there are many other news out there that overcome the need to speak about the road safety. So if there is a media that is devoted to road safety, they should pay equal attention both to the positive and the negative parts of the issue. So whenever there is a campaign, it should be reported in the way that is best for the campaign, not the way that is best for example, for selling more newspapers.
I think the difficult issue is the target group. Because with parents, it's rather easy. We can find ideas how the media could tackle this area, what to talk about, what not to talk about, how to think about the different types of parents and so on. But young people are not using the media that we are used to. They're not reading newspapers, they're not watching TV anymore. But for the majority of them, the first driving experience is Grand Theft Auto. And I think that's a very tricky situation, because we have to find ways to communicate with young people who are not trusting media generated by others than their peers. So their filter is getting news from peers, from friends, through Facebook, Snapchat, whatever. And journalists and people producing media, I don't know, films, documentaries, whatever, they don't know what young people are using at all. At least I have this feeling.
John, you wanted to come in on this?
I need to say, really, one of the things that media doesn't often reflect when they get involved in the road safety debate is that most of the collisions that happen and most of the problems and the deaths and injuries occur because people break the law. I mean, yes, there are better ways that we can teach people, we can try and make people more aware, but it's very difficult to actually stop people breaking the law. I mean, it is against the law to exceed the speed limit, but people do that. It's against the law in most countries in Europe, I think now, to use your smartphone whilst you're driving. But people do that. So it's not just about education, it's also about law enforcement. Now, I was at a conference yesterday of the European Police coordinating body, TIPSOL, and they were talking there about the problems of cutbacks in policing, meaning it's more difficult to enforce a lot of this stuff. More and more is being done by cameras, automatic number plate recognition and so on. But it is important to remember that all the training in the world won't help someone if they choose to break the law. And you know, there are very few, if any, people who go through a red traffic light who don't know that that's wrong. They just make a decision that on that day at that time they're going to break the law. So we also need to concentrate on the fact that it's not just about the training that we do and the attitude that people have to road safety. It's about their attitude to law breaking.
Yes. I think it's very important to echo that. I mean, it's very easy for the media to kind of to fall in with a cry that somebody should do something, the government should do something, whereas actually there's plenty of legislation or regulation out there, and I think the media needs to encourage the story that it's the readers who actually have the responsibility for the safety, because the environment out there, it's their readers and their readers' children who are both suffering from and causing the accidents that happen.
Another question that's come in, perhaps this should also be directed to you, John. Regarding the last study recommendation, what are the best arguments to convince insurers to use telematic technology for young drivers and their parents?
I have to say, I think the jury's still out. I think that the difficulty in debating this is the reticence that the insurance companies have in sharing information that they get from telematics, because obviously they're commercial businesses and they use telematics in order to make their products more attractive. I mean, it would seem kind of a bit grandma and apple pie that if an insurer can see what a young person's doing, and if they do it right, they get an advantage, whether that's a financial advantage immediately or it doesn't mean they get a penalty or whichever way around it is, then common sense seems to suggest that will be a good thing for most people. I think the problem is that we have to try and make sure that what the insurers are offering young people are the correct telematics. I told the story before of the young people racing to get home. So it's exactly how it's all linked. But I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that it ought to help, because it's kind of people by choice allowing Big Brother into the car, and I accept entirely the point that, you know, we shouldn't be spying on each other all the time. But if young people, you know what's expected of them, that they mustn't go over the speed limit, that, I mean, this telematics can measure all sorts of things like how fast people go around corners and when they're driving and what times of day, then if all that's used in a sensible way, you would hope it would be beneficial. But as I say, you know, good training, proper restrictions, and people obeying the law is the main thing.
And also young people clearly being responsible enough that when the box is turned off, they will continue to drive well. You would hope so.
I mean, you say that, but maybe the box ain't never going to be turned off. Maybe we're all going to have a box. So that, you know, if that's the only way to make us all obey the law, fitting a box in every car wouldn't be difficult. Organising computer systems to monitor millions and millions of drivers across Europe might be more difficult. But I mean, maybe that's something that we have to go on and look at for everybody in the future.
But will we then put also a box in a bike, in a motorbike?
Where does it end?
We still live in a society. The easiest thing would to be from the day of your birth, put a chip in your body, and then you can control everything. So I hope we can still live in a society that is not controlled day in, day out. So I think there are pros and cons as far as the black box is concerned.
Another question that's come in. How should we encourage schools to teach road safety to those approaching driving age? Maybe this is one for you, Daniel.
I think that schools are by default interested in teaching road safety because it's for the safety of the children that go there to the school. And the teachers completely understand that being safer for the pupils means being safer for the teachers from the perspective that they don't have additional problems to their daily life. So the point is, how do they find enough time to teach road safety? Because the school curriculum is already full with a lot of subjects. As Esther said, many of them are not needed. So probably there has to be a revision of what is actually offered to the school to pick whatever the children need most. After all, the most important thing for the young people is to survive, right? To join the society in their good health when they have to enter the workforce, for example. So this should have priority over other issues that are now taught and that don't have a future. But I think this is more a point of legislation, because the legislating body has to understand that probably one lesson less in whatever subject and giving the time slot for a road safety lesson by professionals that know what they're doing, that are, for example, outside the school, is going to be much more beneficial to the children than, for example, staying with the current situation.
Yeah, something. European policy, of course, there's no direct influence on the policy of the nations. But European policy is going towards school leadership, which means a full autonomy for the school, both in curriculum and budget, and a joint decision on both by the major stakeholders, teachers, parents, and students. And I think that's the way to do that.
I think the other thing that's also important, we talked about the example that parents need to show to their children. And we heard a story recently of a quite senior professional who suddenly realised that he probably wasn't setting a very good example when his 3-year-old started swearing at other drivers because she was copying daddy. But we also, if we're going to use teachers, they also need to set a good example, whether it's just straightforward pedestrian road safety or cycle safety or car safety. In history, you can teach the subject, but you don't have to demonstrate any good example of being a good historian. But if you're going to teach road safety, you have to act it and live it. And children and young people are very quick to mock those who give instructions and then do something else themselves. So I think it's important that we make sure that all those involved in young people's education follow a good road safety creed.
I'm afraid that's all that we have time for. We've come to the end of what's really been a fascinating and enlightening discussion. It's been a pleasure for me to hear from such a varied and knowledgeable panel. So all that's left to be said is thank you very, very much for coming and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.